Atlas Salt has been one of the most talked about small cap companies this year, and with the recent correction in share price has provided a great opportunity for investors as well. In order to talk all things salt, we're joined once again by Atlas President Rowland Howe. Rowland, welcome back.
Hey, Brandon, good to be here.
And good to have you. Well, this has relevance to Atlas Salt, so I'd like to start off with the recent news of Koch Minerals investing $252 million US to obtain 17% ownership of Compass Minerals, the only publicly traded salt producer in North America. There's speculation that the real objective of the largest private company in the United States is to acquire Compass outright and take private for its Goderich asset, one that you're very familiar with. I have a few questions, but I'd like to start off with a very simple one. Did Koch's move to get a slice of Compass surprise you at all?
It did. The public information is that they were investing in the new Compass focus on lithium. But, Koch is a massive mineral trading company. And just like the other privately held large company that's in salt, Cargill, both of them are now in the salt business. And I'm sure once they get to see just what the salt business, how it operates and how well it performs, I'm sure they'll want to be a bigger part of that too. Yeah,
and I found it interesting as well because we talk a lot about these strategic acquisitions that have been happening within the salt industry, $5.2 billion USD since 2020 alone. Did Koch not also attempt, though, to acquire the salt assets of K+S, which ultimately went to Mark Dimitri's Stone Canyon?
That's my understanding. I mean, when K+S marketed their American salt assets, there was a bit of a bidding war. Stone Canyon won that, and now they have those assets, and they paid about 12x EBITDA for those assets.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see all these, one investment after another in this space, which leads me to my last question on this. How does an investment like this by Koch potentially impact the desirability of a world-class undeveloped salt deposit like Atlas has with Great Atlantic?
Great Atlantic is the premier undeveloped salt project in North America, and an opportunity we've got there to utilize the latest technology. It'll be a leading low-cost producer, low-cost profile, with decades of potential cash flow, and it makes it highly advantaged and a desirable asset in the eyes of many.
Yeah, and it's important to note as well that Koch paid $252 million USD for only 17% of Compass, whereas that is now much larger than even the entire market cap of Atlas as it stands today. So lots of opportunity there for investors in the near future. Now let's turn to Atlas's most recent news release, though. The day after Canadian Thanksgiving, there was a notable shift in tone based on the interview that was part of the news release where you're referring to Great Atlantic as having the potential to becoming the biggest and best underground salt mine in the world. You also pointed out that Atlas may not be the one putting this into production. Can you confirm if Atlas has entered into any CAs with respect to Great Atlantic?
Well, I can't really comment on that here, but I refer you back to our May 19th, this year, May 19th, 2022 news release. And we announced then we've brought on a special advisory firm, corporate advisory firm, and they haven't been twiddling their thumbs.
Fair enough. And we all know as well that those things will be said when they're meant to be said, but there's a few lines to be read in between there. Now, if you don't mind me asking, though, your personal preference, would it be to gain the backing for Atlas to put this into production and take on the big guys yourself, or is it to find a buyer for the project?
Well, it's not my personal preference that matters. I mean, the foremost consideration is always what's best to maximize shareholder value.
Fair enough. Well, also in that news release, you highlighted about how Atlas received its DTC eligibility in the United States for ease of trading. And there's a game plan for rolling out the Atlas story to investors, not only in the US, but in other parts of the world as well, in particular Europe. Now, you just returned from Europe. Can you talk about how that trip went and why you were there?
That trip was really a prelude to what we're lining up in terms of getting the Atlas story told. But we were able to meet with a great number of investors, and they were very impressed by what we were telling them. The reception was very positive. We know how compelling the Atlas story has been for Canadian investors, and imagine rolling that out to the rest of the world. There's a much bigger market out there.
Yeah, and speaking of much bigger market, DTC eligibility and now being upgraded to the OTCQB Investors, I know I can't stress enough how important this is for investors, because millions of investors could not invest in this story even if they wanted to. Without that, you can't. Certain brokers don't allow you. Certain brokerages won't allow you. So having that now opens up all the United States, but also to Europe as well, as we just alluded to. Now, if Great Atlantic is ultimately going to become the biggest and best underground salt mine in the world, how much tweaking would be required at Turf Point? This is a lot of people have been talking about this on the boards, and investors have been very curious about this. Does it have the ability to scale up in the same way the mine would scale up with inclined ramp access?
I mean, Turf Point is probably the crown jewel of this project. It's a deep water port right next to the shallowest deposit in eastern North America. It makes it such a highly advantaged asset, so close, within 3 kilometers of the port, and can easily accommodate a significant salt mine right now. And to further increase tonnage with similar scalability that the ramp access provides Great Atlantic, it's merely a function of effective engineering. Turf Point has all the DNA, the right bones, everything to help Great Atlantic potentially become the biggest and the best underground salt mine in the world.
Yeah, if it's just engineering, that means that all it is a money aspect. And if you can upgrade that Turf Point access, but then that also allows you to upgrade and update the production of Great Atlantic, I can imagine that would be done. Now, I've also got another question that's been all over the boards and always on investors' minds. The feasibility study. This is so important for Atlas. Can you give us an update on the feasibility study? How's it going?
Absolutely. We're in the late stages. It's going well. SLR, who are doing the work, are a very much respected organization. And they've got such good rigor in doing this. And they're going to produce a first-rate feasibility study. And it's one I'm very much eagerly anticipating, along with other investors, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely they are. Well, inflation, if we can switch the tone for a moment, inflation is on everyone's lips these days. How does the current inflationary dynamic impact the prospect of Great Atlantic versus its peers in the industry, the 15 or so operating salt mines in Eastern North America?
I think this gives Great Atlantic actually a competitive advantage. 2 issues here: the rising cost of overseas shipments, plus the disproportionate impact of inflation on the existing aging operating mines in North America. They have a lot of legacy fixed costs that are rising at the same rate.
Yeah, and not just the cost being rising as well, but also the price of salt, if I'm not mistaken, has risen a good 14% this year as well. So if you can get more for salt, the demand's unwavering. The demand is not being affected by inflation. You need road salt on your roads, or else there's accidents, and nobody wants that. So it'll be very interesting, and obviously gives that extra little bit of element for why it's advantageous to have such a new mine. And speaking of those advantages, the other operating salt mines that are currently in East North America, there's been recent news on the challenges of introducing something like continuous mining in those old mines. Can you briefly describe what those challenges are and the advantage that Atlas has in introducing them right from the very beginning?
Introducing continuous miners into existing mines, it's not the challenge of continuous mining, it's the challenge of syncing that up with the rest of the mine structure. And these are big underground mines, so they have a lot of infrastructure costs and that Great Atlantic's not going to have. We're going to start off with a mine designed for continuous miners, by continuous miners, first principles. It'll give us a great cost advantage. We won't have a lot of those legacy costs in Great Atlantic.
Yeah, fascinating to hear. And obviously, everything we've been talking about just builds this case more and more for why a major out there, whether in the salt industry or not, can look at this cash cow for decades to come and see why it's such a desirable asset for them to potentially buy out there. So lastly, though, Rowland, we always like to end off by asking the question that's always on the minds of investors: what should the market be excited about and looking forward to in the coming weeks from Atlas Salt?
I think, our latest news release foreshadows a few things. With our officials Brooks spin out the way, it's time to bring attention back to Great Atlantic, and that's it's been a large part of all our lives. It's going to be a prime focus. Just watch what unfolds.
Mm-hmm. Words that many investors have been repeating all over North America. Thank you so much, Rowland, for your time. Lots of exciting times ahead. And I look forward to having you on again in the near future, because that means we're probably speaking about something that we didn't know as of today. So looking forward to that, Rowland, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brian.